Welcome to the Align Life podcast by yours truly, Dr. Tiffany. How about we get out that magnifying glass and look at every part of your life? The awesome, the suck, and everything in between. There's so much beauty in you. Stop being afraid of what isn't good enough and let's double down on what is together. It's about your truth and your life, aligned. Hey guys, welcome back to the Align Life with Dr. Tiffany. Today we have one of my favorite people, as you could tell from my introduction in this, David Caspers. Sounds so professional. He's my cousin, and I think so much more than my cousin, and that's somebody that I totally admire. I think in life, we have these people that we always converge with, no matter where on the path of life that we are. And you are one of them. Hi, Dave.
How are you? It's great to see you. I agree with you. Just seeing you a couple weeks ago and turning to you at a time of need. Who would have thought we'd be sitting in Fargo in a coffee shop, having the conversation we were? So, and
absolutely.
All of that, yeah.
We'll get into all that. And like what loss does in life, I think is one thing you're going to be able to give perspective to people on how that can work for us or work against us and how we can lean in instead of shut down, what actually happens in times of trauma and healing and how that looks. But in our first 20 minutes of just shooting the shit, excuse my French, we have like a lot of items that we could touch on. So I'm going to start with one and we're just going to see where it goes. Well, I talk a lot about imperfect action, as I've done enough podcasts and blog posts on just take action, because action erases anxiety every single time. When we do something that fills our soul or moves us closer to our calling, if we continue to think about it, we get stuck in the mud, which we also just talked about. So looking at happiness and what actually is it? How do we move towards it instead of have it be a thing that people just get to feel? Can we just talk about what the journey of it looks like, or what it's looked like to you, or what you see in people? I'm giving you the mic.
All right. So funny. And by the way, if for whatever reason I don't make sense, be sure and help me clean up what I'm thinking here, because I might jump spot to spot.
Oh, yeah, you do? You do that?
I do. I know. I don't think any sentence has a period. I've used more commas than anybody I know. I remember a year in my previous career at Target. I have a Post-it note from that I save. I save a bunch of this junk that reminds me of times we've grown and times we didn't. One of the Post-it notes that I saved, I wrote on it, and it says, I worried more this year than I accomplished. That was one of those fits of frustration where I came out of the office, took a Post-it note, wrote it down. I was like, this has to stop. I just thought about all the times that I sat and worried. And I think you said it best. You move into action and a good portion of the anxiety will take care of itself. It's inaction, idle hands. I think we all know that saying.
Idle hands, no kidding.
The work of the devil. And an idle mind is the gift that anxiety is looking for to feed off of. No doubt about that.
Absolutely.
I always have been impressed with my dad. And so when we talk about loss and we talk about anxiety, just a couple of weeks ago, my father passed away, and it was an interesting journey for him, an interesting time to lose someone that mattered so much to me. I would always tell people my dad's my guy. That's my guy. And so when I lose my guy, it's going to be trouble. And the kind of trouble that I meant was emotional trouble and hurt that I didn't want to face. I worried that I didn't have the strength or stamina to ever make it through that day. Even as a kid, I thought about that stuff, Flying to his funeral, I took out my phone like I do in so many different ways. I go into my notes section, which I could go into right now. And I made myself a list of how to behave at the funeral. And I did it sort of in a way so that I could keep myself composed. I was worried that I didn't want to appear vulnerable. I won't say vulnerable, so vulnerable. I was afraid I would be so vulnerable that it would be embarrassing, and that was the kind of anxiety and hurt I was having. Now, mind you, in the business I'm in today, we manage hospitals, 30 hospitals across 7 states, and we're facing the battle of COVID. And the loss I see every day in those 30 hospitals also is an interesting gift from God to ease my pressure in losing my own father. My dad had a great life, lived to be 77, lived healthy a good portion of his life, used his time and energy for the goodness of others. And as a matter of fact, the way he used his energy is what propelled me to want to be a better, I use the term honorable. I want to die honorable, whatever that means. And so when people say, that was an honorable guy, and that had a lot to do with my dad. Well, I watched my dad in his life, and I thought he always had a certain sense of perfection about him, but the perfection was in his spirit. It wasn't a perfection so much in his body, and it wasn't a perfection in any kind of sense where you would think he was arrogant. Actually, you sense quite the opposite. And I wanted that. I aspired to have that same kind of sense about it. So I started to write down, what are those things he does? How do I become more like that? And as a matter of fact, how do I even try to become a little better than that, but not better as a human? He didn't take such great care of his body. I describe my dad as being vibrant, and I've been chasing down having a vibrant life for quite some period of time now, about 6 years. 6 years. And it all started when I saw a photo of him at a funeral with his brothers. His brothers are in excellent physical condition. They're not quite as generous as he is. My dad's physical condition was rough. He had been giving all of his energy to others and not taking care of himself. And I thought there's a balance there. There's some kind of, you use the term alignment, and it makes complete sense to me. There's some balance that we have to find where we take good care of ourselves so that we can take good care of others, not instead of or because of we can't, etc. Anyways, in chasing down that vibrancy, in wanting to be more like him, I start to work on that and attitude, because when he showed up with energy, he also showed up with an attitude. And his attitude was always soft and gentle and positive.
Yes.
Well, I started to work on that stuff, and I realized I couldn't live up to the same standard, that my vibrancy could rise, but it looked a little more like intensity, as you well know.
2 alphas on the line right now.
Alpha 1 to Alpha 2. Let's prepare to discuss. Over. Right. And then when I started to work on attitude, I created sort of this persona of a good attitude, not a real good attitude. And then when I started to be aware that my positive attitude was like an empty chocolate Easter bunny, that the insides weren't as thick as the outsides were coming across, I realized I needed to learn more and understand more and work on myself. That's a long way to get to this word happy. And I'm so sorry for that.
No, that's the journey though. People just want the short answer of the destination, the tactical part of happiness, or the tactical part of purpose, or the tactical part of impact. The vulnerability is what is required. The leaning in is what is required. The awareness of like, what does that even feel like? So yes, we want the journey.
Yeah,
David.
Yeah, I know. You're right. And it's funny too. Unless we're hungry, it doesn't taste as good either when we get there, right? Unless we're thirsty, we don't take whatever water's there. Anyway, long story short, I encountered this book and this particular thought leader at the time, Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas is from Greece, and he lived in an era, I can't recall exactly, so don't quote me, somewhere between 200 and 400 AD. But he has this particular writing where he takes apart happiness into 2 chunks. He takes apart happiness into perfect happiness and imperfect happiness. And I'm like, this will be interesting. Where will this go? Perfect happiness. Okay. I just sort of assumed I would be happy in life when I had the things lined up that I wanted to line up. And if and when that point came, I would show up happy. Well, that always stayed just out of the reach of my hand, right? So I'm really starting to get curious about where he's going with this. And then when I thought about imperfect happiness, I kind of like, even now, I'm like, imperfect, you're not going to be happy with imperfections. Well, then he separates it. And in separating, he says, and he starts off with, perfect happiness is very attainable in the afterworld. And I went, oh, well.
Oh. Well, I shouldn't even try anymore then.
All right. Good news. I will eventually get there if I do the right things.
Right.
And I'm kind of like, well, I guess they call that heaven, right? Or whatever your religious belief may take, the place it may take you. And that kind of made sense to me. And then I'm like, okay, what's this imperfect happiness? And then he describes this ability. And in one place, it's spoken of this way. When a baker makes his bread or her bread, and the bread is cooking and the bread begins to crack, and when the bread cracks and it starts to brown inside the crack, is that a defect or is that the beauty of the bread?
Yeah,
right. And then you and I were in a coffee shop and we saw amazing pastries. The things that made the pastries amazing was all the different colors on the edges and the crispiness and the gooey and part of it, like all the differences, all the imperfections that made it perfectly a great pastry. But when it's ourselves, we look at those imperfections and say, I got to fix these lips. I got to change this about me. I got to get rid of these fat cheeks. I got to do all these different things and then I'll be happy. Well, in essence, he says you have to adopt this mindset of an imperfect happiness. And when you adopt the mindset that they can go together and they can go together with all these imperfections, like the bread and the cracking of the bread and the browning of the bread, then it starts to fill you. It starts to fill you differently. And then you start to see it differently. Later, I read other pieces. Right now, I'm reading a couple books on nature. I'm reading Walden and Flourish. And in Walden, he also goes on to describe how beautiful nature puts itself together. As when we go in nature, we're not looking for these patterns or symmetries that we're looking for in ourselves. We're enjoying what's there. And to me, it's kind of the same way about imperfect happiness. So long story short, kind of around the loss piece and chasing down happiness and the funeral piece, those are the pieces still today that capture my interest and have me focused. And by the way, on the plan, when I said I'm going to go into the church and into the funeral behaving this way, of course, I run into you first and you peel away a few layers and you give me a safe place to lean into and love and kindness. And so does your whole family. And so I appreciate our confluence that we always arrive at.
Yep. There are not many people in life that you can continue to converge in at a depth that isn't surface, no matter where we are in life, right? No matter what happens in our business and what happens in our marriage and what happens in loss of your mom and dad in the last few years. But when you continue to grow and other people continue to grow, you continue to converge along that. I don't know. Is it a path of purpose? Is it a path of impact? I don't know. I don't know what kind of path it is, but I talk a lot about our influence, our friends or family, and how sometimes just knowing when you need to change the room and change what that looks like, whether that's in your work and in how you feel every day, in your relationships, in your community, in your communication, and in your beliefs around it all. How does that look if you were to change the room? You don't maybe consider yourself vulnerable often, but I would be remiss to think that the people around you do see you as vulnerable because you're continuing to grow. I don't think growth can happen without leaning in and being vulnerable. Maybe not to your perfect standards. You know what I mean? Maybe not to where you see yourself, but you're always continuing to challenge yourself and peel away and knowing when you need to peel away versus stay steady and grounded in who you are.
It's so interesting. When I was listening to you, I was also thinking about when we think a lot about imperfections and happiness, we think about ourselves. And I've known you since you were probably 5 or 6, something like that. Whenever your parents thought you were old enough to be left alone, but still paid me to babysit.
With the Caspers.
Some goofball out there fishing. Yeah, I see them. They're back there over there somewhere. But I think about even, our relationship has had imperfections. And I think about those imperfections, though, as like, I don't know if you've ever been to the East Coast when you're walking on the beach. There's a lot of the places make taffy. And those taffy machines have a push and pull to them and a tug. And they work really hard to make the taffy as elastic as possible to get it to that consistency. And I think embracing the imperfections in relationships and allowing that push and pull to strengthen it rather than to see it as imperfect and to see it as kind of the imperfect throwaway versus the imperfect elastic and about to become something better.
I'm coaching and mentoring in the Unleashed program. And I just did a training on push and pull, how that relates to masculine, feminine energy. So just all of the energy combined with moving forward, stay grounded, move forward, and how you need both of them all the time and how it might not be balanced. That might not be the right word. I call it imbalance because that could be in your personality. That could be in your approach. That could be in your tone. That could be everywhere, right? But understanding when the imbalance happens or disharmony, it's because of a push and pull scale that is way off, or the masculine feminine energy of how we're showing up and how we're leading. And typically because of some kind of trauma somewhere or expectation. Before we got on live, for anybody here, we talked about goalposts and what those are in our life. And when we see what someone else wants us to be, we typically have an imbalance in push-pull energy somewhere because we're just freaking banging. We're just pushing, right? Until we realize that is exhausting. The beingness of curiosity and growth is exhausting when it's not your goalposts, right? So when we were having coffee that day, I don't know if you remember, I don't even know what we were talking about. I was talking about one goalpost. And you're like, dude, you're missing the other goalpost.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the guiding light, a lighthouse. Can you talk about what that is and how it's changed?
Yeah, kind of going back to that lost. When I was beyond the kind of lost part where your heart hurts and the person's gone, I was into what's the other part of lost that I'm feeling? What's the directional lost started to emerge? I was surprised by that. I'm 50 years old. I'm like, what did my parents, what did I still need in them that gave me a sense of direction? And so it literally caused this vision where I would be looking down a football field and watching, my mom passed away about 18 months ago, surprisingly, with sepsis. And so it was like one side of the goalpost fell down. And, joking with you is like when we only have one side of a goalpost and we kick a ball, we don't know if it's in or out. When we do something, we don't know if it's in or out. And when we put up the other side, then we have a sense. Well, when one parent goes, one side falls.
Yeah.
The other parent can try to hold it up, per se, but the other parent goes and the goalposts, I don't know if they fall or become invisible or they become more of a memory than a person helping to hold up expectations for you to continue to satisfy, get validation from, please progress towards whatever you want to say. Those things started to fade. And I suddenly found myself in the couple of days back slowing down my run towards the goalposts because I was wondering, am I going in the right direction now? Because I can't see them. And my brain was like, why do you need them? I don't know the answer yet. The questions are only emerging right now. Like, why did you need them? What are you looking for from them? Were they helping you prevent some bad behavior you wish you didn't have? Were you looking for that validation? Was it important to you to show that progress? What? In the meanwhile, in the back of my brain, I could hear this other voice whispering, well, that's what faith is for. That's what faith is for. And I'm like, literally thinking to myself, what do you mean, self? Or whatever the spirit is whispering to you. What do you mean? Yeah. And it seems so weird to say this out loud for whatever reason. But I started to think, is that supposed to be your faith as in seeing a cross instead of a goalpost? And then is that more about the morals and standards that we have inside of us and just doing what's right? And if that's the case, well, that's actually deeper, more grounding, a little relieving actually too.
I bet.
Anyway, so that's kind of what's starting to emerge in sort of that's the light that's starting to emerge, I think, as you referred to it as the lighthouse that's starting to emerge as the goalposts fade away. And the goalpost, to me probably meant it was more of a intensity and more of a sport, and the light is more of a purpose. And it's actually more challenging isn't the right word. It makes each step and each interaction with people more meaningful. Not because I'm looking for meaning, but because we were talking about this. I was coaching someone this morning, and he's a big business leader. And we got to this point where it felt like to him, business is a game, which is great. It is. But it felt also that people were a game. That didn't feel so good to me. And so we stuck on that point that life is a game, but people are not a game. And so I think in this and in that lighthouse and in interactions and in purpose, then each word and each moment becomes so precious. And I'm probably switching gears a little bit. I have a tendency
what we're supposed
to do that a little bit, but
I'll grab your comma. If it's too many commas, I'm going to say stop.
It's smart. There's a gentleman who wrote a book on greatness, and his name's Howard Glasser. He lives in Tucson. He is known for the nurtured heart approach. He is a world-renowned counselor for the most difficult children. And he uses an approach that only has 3 steps. And they're the goofiest, simplest 3 steps. It just makes me crazy. And one of my friends in Tucson, Kate Shinneberry, introduced me to him, and I ended up having lunch with this guy. But she wanted me to know him because she wanted me to be a better dad. Which is really cool when you have friends that are like, hey, I got this person, you should meet them. And then you start to realize she didn't say, I want you to be a better dad. She didn't say you need to do this better. She said, have you ever heard of this? Let's talk about this. I know this guy. He was my professor. You guys should meet. Anyways, nurtured heart, 3 steps. Number 1, when you want more of something, you show it extraordinary enthusiasm or extreme enthusiasm. And that one on itself is funny, and I'll go back to it. Number 2 is when you want less of something, you give it no energy. This is no surprise to you because I think this is your kind of thinking. You probably could have written this a few years ago. And the last piece is you do have to set boundaries. And when it comes time to uphold those boundaries, which you do every time when the boundary is crossed, you do so with no energy. You do it quick, you do it without anxiety, and you do it without fear. You apply the consequence. And that's so interesting because I started to reflect back then. Geez, let's start with the last one. When I apply a consequence to my kids, what I do? Oh, drama. Yeah. I made that show the biggest. How could I create fear? Send them to their room, let them think about it. All the shit we I probably shouldn't say it, but
you can.
Anxiety to create anxiety in kids. And yet we get masterful at it, right? And it fuels their energy, which means they're going to be ready for a fight. And instead of apply it quickly, apply it without energy and move on. Because I also think in us later, that probably becomes some weird guilt thing that we hold on to when we disappoint somebody else. Instead of saying, oh, well, so what? Now what? Anyways, that piece. And then the extreme enthusiasm, though, that one has my attention. I think I have good energy. And I'll use Kennedy, for example. I can't think of the last time when at this point in time that I showed her extreme enthusiasm over something. Extreme enthusiasm.
Isn't extreme enthusiasm annoying?
It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. I think that's why we don't do it. This same guy I was coaching today, we talked about this same thing. And I said, when's the last time you danced with your daughter? Oh, he goes, oh, she loves to dance. I go, she does? Yeah, she's 7 and it's her thing. And I go, so when's the last time you danced with her? Couldn't think of the time. I said, so, if we take this extreme enthusiasm when you want more of something, let's say she does something that you've been really waiting to see her do more of, and she does it. Imagine if you take her hand, put your phone down, crank up the music, and start to twirl her and dance. How magical is that moment? She will say, how do I get more of those moments? Which is exactly what you want, right? Anyways, that's Howard Glasser on Nurtured Heart. He wrote this book on greatness, and he used a lot of those principles. And inside of those principles, he, in essence, is saying, how we talk to people about eat what's right for our bodies? And we talk about how to exercise and do it right for our bodies. And then we try to worry about reading the right stuff for our mind, right? Well, where he gets to in greatness, which is kind of ties all this bringing the light out, is you also need to say only good things to other people and hear only good things from other people, right? It's a type of greatness we don't talk a lot about. We throw out words like they're free. We are careless about the impact it could have on others.
Absolutely.
You and I have joked about this before. When we're at work and somebody schedules a 1-hour meeting, we might show up at our best. But when we pull into home and the garage door's open and shoes are all over hell and we about trip on our way in, we don't show up as our best and pick our words.
Right.
And so inside of that light emerging, inside of wanting to be more vibrant, inside of wanting to be more responsible as my dad departed and taking on part of that responsibility is this desire to say and do more of the right things. In particular, say, when you're with people, how do you do that in such a way that every moment isn't heavy? It's just more intentional. And I think sometimes we get confused by doing more means doing a hell of a lot more poorly instead of doing a few things less more consciously. That's been the stuff around goalposts and the light and being a little more intentional without it being more exhausting.
So I'm going to ask you a question based on what I said about Woody at his prayer service. There's not many people who see the person behind the perceived identity or the role. I mean, you've had massive career success, Dave, right? Everybody has an opinion on how that looks. So one thing he taught me was we were always with Connie and Woody growing up. They were like our people, right? I would ask how all you guys are. He would start with what I really wanted to hear. Dave's great. Work is great. He's moving up the chain. Blah, 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 blah. His family is doing X, Y, Z. And then he would talk about you as a human doing all of the things that I actually unconsciously asked about. How did that impact you? Now, you are probably living in a place of extreme achievement, which you and I both have a tendency of doing. Do more so that we climb the chain. We are the boss. We are the leader. We are all the things until it's like, holy shit, who am I doing all these things? What did he teach you about the who behind the what?
What was really dumbfounding to me about when you gave that quick note of appreciation to him is I didn't really recognize that he had been doing it until you said it.
Really?
Yeah. Now, I knew how he made me feel. I knew what he was interested in. He talked to us either every day or every other day, almost our whole lives. What was funny, my brother bragged about that. Oh, Dad called me like every other day and he knew the people in my office. And my sister goes, he called me every other day. And then the two of them were like, how could this be? And then I go, he called me every other day, you know, and it's so interesting that you say that. He never once asked me, not one time, what job are you trying to get? How much money do you make? Not once. Even though he kind of came from a somewhat prominent family that valued that. He wanted to achieve things, but he didn't value it. But he never asked that. He always asked literally what you said, like, how are you doing? What I know, and now what I know to give him credit for is it's what I look into people for. Really, what direction are they going? I don't give two shits what they've achieved.
Yeah.
I worry a lot about what direction they're going with, you know, a little bit of their bad behaviors and a little bit of their good behaviors. And if they're honest about the bad and they're putting some effort for the good, I think they're in good shape.
Yeah.
I, at some point in time, a few years ago, wrote down these 3 words. And I think you actually now through the conversation are helping me tie where they came from. But the 3 words are direction, momentum, and results. Somebody said, what makes you happy? You know, what makes you happy, Dave? Cheeseburgers for sure. Beer second. Healthy kids third. You know, a few other things fourth, which you can't. But anyway, but I'm not the guy that chases down the numbers at the very end of anything. And I think that's the R. That's the result. I don't chase that down. But I do worry greatly about what direction someone's going in. Because if they're going in the wrong direction, the momentum's going to make it worse. If they're going in the right direction and they have any kind of momentum, things are going to be good for a period of time. So I constantly check in to have a sense of what direction someone is going. And like I said, I would have never attributed that trait to my dad had you not mentioned that. And I think you're spot on with him. He was also very gentle about your sins. I use the word sins less religiously, but the stuff you shouldn't have done, the stuff that you don't like about yourself, the stuff others don't like about you. He was more of a guy that would put his arm around you and turn you and go, yeah, I think doing a little more of this is probably the right thing to do. Instead of sitting you down and saying, you know, this is wrong and I wish you were this. He didn't do that. He was more guiding and participative in shaping. And I think that too also speaks to his ability to see the character of a person, the decisions around their character, who they're putting around them, and what direction that's leading them into. But he was not a talker either. Ironically, I was literally trying to make a list of some of the things that I thought my dad ever said to me.
Yeah.
And it's blurry. You know how he made you feel and you know how he guided you. And he showed up with frequency to make sure it was in the right direction. Like I said, I was dumbfounded when you said it and I thought you were spot on. And I thought, how could she see that so clearly?
Yeah. Can we talk about wrong versus right? Just a bit.
Oof.
Well, you just said it a bunch of times and my like little red blinky light went like, is there wrong direction in the course of the path that's already been created for us? Our job is just to find it, right? It's to uncover the gifts. Can we talk a little bit about?
You're going to make me clean up my language, aren't you? This sucks.
No, I'm just asking, what do you see?
I'll tell you what I think about quite a bit. I have had a lot of different jobs. I have worked in a lot of different states, most of them with the same companies, right? And which is good because then the context in which you learn things remains the same, but the differences are easier to see. And the outcome also remains the same, which is very interesting. Did I make sense?
Yes, totally.
It's very interesting to see that. And I ran the drug business for Target, which was just a little over $6 billion. And inside of that, you see so many things around who you're handling as patients, what they're taking, why are they taking it, what are the outcomes of those situations. I did operational work, et cetera. But going coast to coast and seeing those things and seeing how people grew up and what their families were consisting of, who your employees are, all those different things, you get a sense that we each have a little tiny prism that we don't know we have, that we slide in front of our eye. And there's a book called The 4 Agreements, which I'm sure most people have read. And there's a section on don't take things personally. And that whole section describes so beautifully how our original frame on that little prism was designed by where we live, who our parents are, what our faith is, what we believe, all those things. And kind of like the goalposts, then we assume that everything outside of those frames must possibly be wrong, right? And then you realize, no, they're not wrong. They're just uniquely someone else's perspective or different. In many arenas, there are things that are healthier for us and things that are less healthy for us. There are things that are dangerous for us, and there are things that are less dangerous. There are things that are harmful to others, and that's a whole different category. I think when it comes to opinion is much wider than right and wrong.
Absolutely.
Right and wrong more has to do with harm, not fashion, not choices. It's harm.
Yeah.
Long answer to
So do you find in mentoring people and leading people and being in people's lives and all the things that they know when wrong shows up? Do you think we know? Because so many people talk about this in terms of decision making, right? Like instead of the typical growth curve being like this, it's a whole hell of a lot of unwinding, rewinding. What are you doing? Where are you going? Was it wrong?
I'm taking notes here because you're opening up such interesting categories. I think we look back on too many things and say it was a choice and it wasn't. It was an unaware action. It is actually both, but we didn't actually slow down enough to make the choice. I didn't learn choices until I saw elevator buttons at Target when I was about 33 years old. And I worked on the 9th floor. And Naomi Kramer, who I've worked with for years, kept hounding me about choices. Everything's a choice. I was like, whatever. I don't understand. I got to get back to work. We were standing outside the elevator bank. I hit 9. She hit 11. And I was like, well, 9's the operational floor. 11 is the HR floor. And my brain went, oh, had I made choices back in my career, I might be going to 11 or 14 or 16 or 26. Interesting. So my little choices led me to the floor I'm on. That's when I understood choices. I took a picture of that silly elevator button and I said, so many times I'm just doing what I'm doing. And then I wind up where I wind up and I go, well, that worked or it didn't. So I think way too many times emotion, passion, whatever it is takes over before choices are really in the forefront. That's my thought on choices. I can't even remember what you said around the other thing because that thing is just so haunting. I think to me at times, wake up and make choices, make it a choice.
Then we go to the brain and knowing that we're driven by our subconscious patterning 95 to 98% of the time.
Yeah.
So all of our choices or unaware actions have been created on past memories, experiences, and traumas, right? So then how do we make a different choice if our subconscious is already patterned to the other thing we did or that we thought with a totally different perspective on why we would do that?
Well, I remember where I was going with this now because you asked me about, do I understand or believe that people know when right or wrong occurred in something they did?
Yeah, I forgot that too.
Shame hits them before right or wrong does. And then after they feel shame, they want to tear apart. Why do I feel shame? Because I'm thinking that was wrong. In a relationship, someone could have made an expectation. Please don't stop at the bar on your way home. Person stops at the bar on the way home, has a beer. Is it right or wrong? We don't know, but they feel shame or guilt. So now they believe it's wrong. Someone might take home a 250 count paper from their office for their home printer. They don't feel shame, but is it wrong? I think people have a little confusion, to be honest with you, on guilt, shame, and wrong. I think wrong is more clear. Shame and guilt are less clear. And I think shame is a horrid word when other people use it to another person.
Yeah.
So I didn't tear that apart, so well. But I think what I find is more people are hung up on feeling inadequate, tied to guilt and shame, than they are feeling bad about something they did that was wrong. They're worried about the wrong if it's illegal. In business, they mitigate the risk and they don't worry so much about it. In their personal life, they worry about the shame and the guilt more. That's what I see. I've been reading this book called Letting Go for 3 years now.
Yeah, I got it right here.
Oh boy, there it is. Yeah. It's really interesting how much we hold on to that slows us down. If we were a boat, it'd be like throwing out a bunch of anchors and trying to figure out how to go faster. We just burn more fuel instead of letting go of stuff. And I got to believe most of the stuff we're letting go of isn't actually where we did wrong. It's just where we have some weird guilt or shame.
Yeah. Which is what I consider trauma, because then trauma sits in your cells and it creates when I do this, then that. And that's our subconscious patterning, whether that happened, the shame guilt happened when we were 5 and we got in trouble from our kindergarten teacher or our parent or a friend's parent for doing XYZ. Instantly we think, I do this, then this, then this. And so in terms of reframing what shame and guilt is, many times we're 30, 40, 50, 60 years old and we haven't reframed anything. So we're continually triggered by that one thing that happened when we were 5 because it's the emotion of it. It's not the thing anymore, which personal development leads. That's part of why we converge at so many levels, you and I, at least, because we're constantly looking like, oh, there's a layer.
Yeah. I think we also look at people and are amazed by how great they are.
Yeah.
And then we say, if we think they're so spectacular, why don't they think it?
Yeah.
I think we're in the quest. We're not selfish people. I don't think either one of us whatsoever. Yep. We're in the quest because the great people around us hang their head and a couple of the doofuses act too proud. And we're trying to figure out why on both angles. And we want to see more people have more happiness and more success, whatever that might look like to them, and less struggle.
Yep. Got to write that down.
Too much gravity for some people and not enough for others, right?
Yep.
Of course, now you have me wanting to unplug, go figure out, what am I hanging on to? What age did it happen to? What is the stuff that could ail me, to your point, or is ailing me, whether it's emotionally or physically, that I need to learn to let go of? I don't spend a lot of time on that. I spend more time on moving on past it instead of resolving it. And I think that, as always, you always give me something that I'm going to have to go dig around at and get better at.
And then we look at vibration or energy of emotions. Guilt, anger, shame, resentment, regret are the heaviest. We cannot have that with joy and truly experience joy. We still have all of that. And it doesn't need to be a deep dive into when I was 5, but it definitely needs to come to the surface, which is the yuck part. It's the shadow part. We can only heal what comes to the surface. We can only heal what is brought back into the light. So when we go back there, or when we recognize now that our thoughts, beliefs, actions, results are one way, and we might not want that anymore, you got to go back to those thoughts and those beliefs from usually our formative years. Those are the things, right? The forgiveness part of letting go, that book.
So you mean to tell me that reading it 3 years in a row might mean I have a problem? That's really interesting, though. As you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, there are some patterns that aren't so great in things I do. This is a dumb one. I built a grill, and when I lived in one state at one house, and when I built it, I accidentally put the back on the front, so the front was open so you could see the tank on the grill, right? 2 houses later, I build a grill, I do the same thing. And I know those are simple examples about instructional stuff, but it makes me wonder, what other patterns of things I believe when I'm doing things, do I just do them and it's not the right thing to do? The outcome of it's not going to either be the right outcome, or there's going to be some bad stuff. This is kind of a stupid one. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but after being divorced, you date a few people, right? Well, I'll be damned if my ex-wife's behavior didn't show up in the other 2 people I dated.
Those damn women.
Then I'm like, so you mean to tell me it must be me? Then you really say, whoa, there's some reflection that needs to occur. Inside of reflection, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm trying to believe that you don't have to de-architect your past to move on from your past. Is it enough to acknowledge it when we discover we had a problem? Do we have to give it a lot of time? Do we have to de-architect it? Do we need counseling to move on from it? Like, what have you learned is the healthiest ways to maneuver through some of those things as we get better at this kind of letting go of that stuff? What have you learned?
Of old subconscious patterns, that's essentially right. Yeah. I believe it is probably a continuum, not what you want to hear. I don't believe it's a direct path from A to B. So let's just take a human whose first traumatic experience was 3 or 4 and they were abused. And I can see the total pattern happening for 40 years until they realize, like, whoa, what happened then has directed every single thing that I've done out of fear, out of need, out of servantry, of whatever that has morphed into, because it's typically not the same behavior that it was when 3 and 4 happened. Does it need to take a long time to heal and move through that? I do not believe so. But we need to go there and feel the feels that are the suck. Hang out in the suck for a bit. Understand what actually happened. Doesn't need to be anything big, right? It doesn't need to be abuse. It can be what your kindergarten teacher told you once. You're lazy. You didn't get that work done, or you didn't get an A. You're a failure. You're worth more. All the things. Now we have all these patterns. So when something pops up when you're 50, you get this weird voice that isn't God's voice or intuitive voice. It's ego's voice. Yeah. Ego wants to keep us safe. It wants to keep us certain. It wants to keep us secure. It wants to keep us comfortable. So what is that chirping? That's when you got to go back to that place. It's probably one of the most common questions I get. Do I actually have to go there to heal it? Now, are there times that we don't need to go there necessarily? We need to be aware of what comes up, because those emotional components of what just came up are hitting you when you're 50. And that same thing is happening when you feel those things like, whoa, this is the subconscious pattern that is keeping me safe. It's keeping me secure. It's keeping me So when I try to push through it, I haven't actually addressed what it was and where those feelings are coming from.
That's very interesting. Makes me think about a house where you don't replace a bad beam underneath that's hundreds of years old, but you keep building on the top of it.
Yes.
You know, everything else is going to try to hold but can't, and it'll hurt other parts of the structure, which it goes to your alignment piece. Or even when an airplane crashes, the thing that they're looking for is the black box. They want to know what was said and what happened. And what you said to me, I guess, or my interpretation of what you said is, play the black box, listen to it. You don't have to de-architect it, but you got to stand in it, and you got to understand it, and you got to understand what that caused in you.
Yeah.
So let's move from it.
So I describe that as shadow work, and I don't even know if that's the right word, but like what if that's where our genius was? Like, what if it wasn't in the light right now? Because the shadow is what we don't want anyone to see. We don't want anyone to feel. We don't actually want to see it, feel it, hear it, anything. But what if that's where the genius is? Like, that's where evolution is. That's where total acceptance of who you are, between who you're showing up as right now and who you're totally meant to be. Why were you put on this earth to be, to do, to have? That incongruent gap in between is where shadow is. What if we just walked it? What if that's where everything was? What if that's where all the answers were? That's where the goalposts were seen. That's where you are.
You mean to tell me there might be treasures in my junk drawer?
Yes.
Damn it.
Back corner, baby.
I wouldn't be surprised by that. I think that's very, very interesting. Yep. And it's probably the unfashionable stuff that isn't looked at on social media. It's probably the stuff that isn't trending in the news.
Yep.
But it's the stuff that has got depth, meaning, purpose, and probably a lot of future value.
Well, because transformation isn't what people pay for, because they want the tactic. They want the, how do I become happy? How do I let go of what holds me back? All this. How do I find my purpose? It's in the transformation. It's in the shadow. It's in the incongruency gap. That's where you have to have the courage to step in and know that that is the safest place you could be. It's not unsafe. But our past experiences and past traumas have told us that place is freaking scary.
One time when we went there.
Yeah.
One time. Yeah.
Never again.
We should go back. Yeah.
So now we've created another trauma of what happens when we continue to push into that place. And what if it were easy? I don't know. What if that was the easiest path, actually? What if that was the simplest path, is just going there?
At some random age, I decided I needed to be a tough guy and get a tattoo. And so I got the world's worst one. So then I thought I needed to get a second one and to fix it. And I didn't remember our conversation on choices. And really apply a lot of thought to it. And it happened and it made it worse. And then I made this one was more of a choice and put it together anyway. But what you described to me reminds me, the first time I got it, I was in my car and I was headed to the train to go to New York City. And I lived by Wilmington, Delaware. And there was a little creek, and it was late fall, and the creek's called the White Clay Creek. It's very shallow and very clear, and it was foggy, and these giant leaves are moving through the air, falling down. And I was driving a car that wasn't me too. You know how sometimes I'm going to be this. If I have all this, I'll be this. No.
Yeah. Right.
I don't subscribe to that anymore, by the way, not at all. But I'm driving on this little road, and I look to my left in the fog in the morning, and I see a log going across the river. And the log is just really near complete deterioration. And I rolled down the window and slowed down, and I looked at the log and I said, God, I'm that log. That's me. I'm positioning myself over the river. I'm fighting with the current so other people can use me to get to wherever they're going. Why would I do that? It felt exhausted, didn't feel purposeful at all. And then I rolled up the window, and I was so proud of my thoughts, and I rolled the wheels about 4 seconds, and I stopped, and I rolled the window down, and I looked at the log, and I go, I'm a dumb log. Had I fallen with the water, I could have went on a journey using the flow of the water.
Yeah.
To some unknown place.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe I would have been a little bit of a bridge at times too, but I would have used all of the flow of the gifts and the situation around me to go on a different environment. And so when you said, well, what if you go into here and it's actually easier? What if it's actually less resistance? I'm like, yeah. So now that the tattoo I have, it does represent to me, be conscious of when to fight for something that might really matter. And likely it's only for people. And be conscious of when you're fighting and it doesn't matter at all.
So good.
You find that. So, but I have to, obviously you can tell by the things that matter to me, I have to think a lot more about choices. And I do think a lot more about choices. I have to watch out for emotion to rule my decisions more than they should. And I have to be conscious when I decide to engage in a fight as a fight to win or a fight for something that matters.
Totally. Oh my gosh.
So.
Right. Fight to win versus one that matters. And that is ego. Right.
Excellent. I'm going to get a hat today. If you can't see the ego in my hat, I'm sure you can see it on me. Something stupid.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Good stuff, my friend.
That's always nice.
Any parting words? Okay, we can't have commas now. It's just a period.
Sure. The conversation that I ended this morning with the gentleman I was working with ended with the two challenges. The first was to send me a text when he dances with his daughter. And the second one was, as he encounters people, do your best to see and feel their spirit, not the rest of them. And it's funny because that ties me right back to what you said about my dad. And so I just want to thank you for the kind words you said about him and for having the kind of intuition you do to say something and see something that's so obvious, but yet so unknown to others or unseen by others. So I appreciate it.
I'm going to part with my period sentence about your dad, the day that he passed. So I was talking to Connie the morning, word was things weren't looking good. So she was responding quite quickly. And it was 11 o'clock and then it was 3 o'clock. And she said, I'm staying here all night. So whenever you want to stop by, I'll be here. Then it was 5 and Craig had been working and I was going to get my nails done and grab a brewery beer and a bite. And it was Saturday night. And so I'm like, man, I'm going to come tomorrow morning, Con, just so you know. So we get our beer, we get our bite. I run one errand. I hate running errands. So once I'm out, I'm like, okay, Tiff's going to be productive. I'm going to contribute here to the family. So I run my errand and I get back into my car and my mom says, Woody passed away. And I shouldn't have been driving. It was my first outbreak of what in the hell? I was so mad at myself. So I texted you. Whatever I said to you, I don't remember. I'm so disappointed in myself. And you said, he knows that you loved him. Oh, so that's the spirit of Woody, right? It didn't matter if you were with him that second, because what he created in relationships and respect and honor and all the things that he created over his whole lifetime. That one moment wasn't going to, it was only to make me feel better, honestly. Right? It was that dang, I wanted to see him. I wanted to tell him. And you said, he knew you loved him. Oh, so what if we could act and be in a way that everyone around us would know that we love them? So when it's our time to go, whatever go means, we don't have to prove in that moment what we had been living the whole time. Isn't that feel like that's, when I'm not lying when I said the band of What Would Jesus Do, those ones, I don't know how old you were when those were a trend, but that is the WWW, what would Woody do, is always in my brain. How can I make this person know and feel that I love them?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to change my last sentence based on what you said. No love subtractions. No love subtractions. He never subtracted love or retracted it. Never.
ever.
Nope. And think about when we're disappointed in people, we shut it off, cut it back, or pull it away.
Yeah. Right.
No love subtractions. That would be a pretty good world to be in.
That might be your book, my friend.
Even if it's just our moment, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love you, big guy.
Love you too. Say hi to the family, please.
I will. Thanks for sharing your heart, even though it wasn't always comfortable. You go there.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening and following the Aligned Life podcast with Dr. Tiffany. If you love this and can think of anyone who needs to hear about it, would you mind sharing with them? Find me online at drtiffanyjohnson.com, where you can find out more about my memberships, courses, mentoring, and any upcoming events. To learn more about chiropractic for you and your family, go to htchiro.com and follow our social pages. I can't wait to connect with you soon, and until then, be you, be aligned.